Hello, and welcome back to the Performance Marketing Unlocked podcast. As always, I'm your host, Joseph Arthur, PMW's multimedia editor. On today's show, my colleague, friend, and PMW's news reporter, Reem Makari, joins me to discuss the earnings reports from a few of the biggest platforms and players in the game from Q4 2024. We touch on big tech, big streaming, and big social. Following that discussion, I'm joined by Helena Hudson, the founder of The Real Eating Company. Helena talks to me about being an entrepreneur in today's difficult business climate. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode of the Performance Marketing Unlocked podcast. Reem Makari, hello. Welcome back to the studio. Lovely having you here, as always.
It's great to be back, Joe. I feel like you usually catch me on weeks where I'm a bit stressed, but this week I'm feeling pretty good. I'm very excited to be back.
A little bit more mellowed out than normal as well. We're recording, it's like middle of the week, it's a Wednesday afternoon, time of recording. And yeah, it was sort of over the hump, I suppose, and things have just this last 7 days have maybe mellowed out just a little bit on the news front. It had been quite hectic, hadn't it?
Yeah, I think January and start of February were very news heavy. I think we had some days where we had to kick things out of our bulletin because we had so much coming in the morning that we had to cover. Things that were happening in the US. We spoke about the TikTok ban before. And it's just been a lot. But I think, this week has been a bit more chill. But I'm also aware we have unlocked in a week's time. So it's not going to be as chill then. Plenty
on the horizon, but it's been nice to just capture a collective breath among the team this week, I think. And while we've had time to breathe, we've managed to do a bit of a deep dive into some big bits of data, specifically some of the biggest platforms across tech, social, and streaming. We dove into their Q4 revenue results because we spend a lot of time talking about where spend is going and what advertisers are investing in. But I think it's high time that we actually take a look at some of the revenue and growth for these platforms and channels and tech providers where people are investing. And you covered this one for us as our trusty news reporter. So why don't you walk us through the big tech platforms to start off? Who are the big tech platforms and how do they do in Q4?
I mean, just for the sake of simplicity, we're going to look at the key takeaways across the big tech platforms and also the streaming ones, but I'm not going to go into the numbers because I'm sure people don't really want to listen to all the numbers.
That's all in there, the numbers.
Yeah, but when we look at Amazon, Alphabet, Meta, Microsoft, and Apple, those are what we'd consider the big tech. I think there's only 2 more that we missed out on. And overall, in Q4 2024, they've done very well in terms of numbers. I think most of them, except for Apple, achieved a 10% year-on-year growth at least, some of them higher. And Apple also hit a record. So they've done pretty well for the end of last year, although we are going to expect to see that slowing down in Q1 2025, which is kind of expected for the start of the year. So it's things like, I think they're going to see a lot of cost-cutting efforts with these companies.
And we've seen some already, haven't we?
Exactly. I mean, Meta had its layoffs recently, which were for the underperforming employees.
Yeah, underperforming staff, and you're on your way out. It was very Musk cutting down X, wasn't it? The rhetoric certainly seems similar of any staff deemed to be underperforming, Meta's laying you off, which isn't, I mean, the sentiment behind that is sound. If you're not performing in a business and you get laid off.
But I mean, if you have a look on LinkedIn and see what people are saying, I don't know if it exactly fits under the underperforming, but that's a whole drama on its own. But I mean, also Disney is making some cost-cutting efforts as well. Apple is returning money to shareholders. So all of these kind of changes, you're going to expect to slow down with that in Q1 2025, but it means that the rest of the year, the strategy will be a lot more sustainable and we'll probably see growth in numbers towards end of the year.
So among these big players, they've rounded out last year with pretty strong levels of growth consistently across the board. Mm-hmm. And as we look to the year ahead, that growth, they're expecting to maintain growth, but the levels at which those platforms' revenue is going to be growing that's expected to decline a little bit, to slow down
just
somewhat.
for the start of the year. And then one of the big takeaways from Q4 2024 is AI being a primary growth driver for a lot of these big tech platforms. And I mean, this is kind of expected. AI is becoming something that's being integrated in everyone's workplace, and it's kind of essential to have it now.
We're moving away from education into implementation. That's been the hot take to start the year.
Exactly. And they're becoming a lot smarter as well with the way that they use AI, creating more in-house tech that works for them, and just kind of like trying to be ahead of competitors. So I mean, with Amazon, Alphabet, Meta, Microsoft, they're all integrating AI into their products and their cloud services, and we see that across advertising and search. Cloud computing as well is becoming a big focus for a lot of these platforms too. So cloud-based AI services are some of the ones that are fueling the growth. That's going to kind of be a continued theme throughout the year, I think.
Without diving too deep into the technical jargon, the takeaway there is AI investment is now driving growth, and so that investment's going to continue into the year. Okay, well that doesn't surprise me dramatically, but I suppose in a lot of ways the broader macroeconomic climate seems to be mirrored by the movements that these tech platforms are making, in that we saw constant turmoil and instability throughout last year, and this has maybe hit a bit of a boiling point, particularly with a lot of the conflicts going on across the globe, the recent election in the US and the subsequent, and in the UK for that matter, and the subsequent sort of economic and fallouts of all of that, should we say. So it seems that these tech players might be batting down the economic hatches a little bit and preparing themselves for uncertainty in the future. And that's why we might have seen some of the layoffs and distributing some money out into shareholders and ensuring that they're getting their tech in order.
It looks from a wider perspective, kind of seeing those headlines in the news, and even us writing about them.
With Meta in particular.
They do look very shocking, but at the same time, it makes sense when you look at cost cutting and people trying to be a bit more cautious. Unfortunately, one of the first steps is layoffs and restructures. So I think that's kind of, as unfortunate as it is very much expected. And I think we'll probably be seeing that with a lot more platforms.
A lot of these Q4 results remind you that these businesses take on personalities in many respects, certainly in the public discourse. And it's easy to forget that they're not necessarily representatives of the figureheads at the top of the companies. They obviously play a big part, but these businesses, first and foremost, are businesses. They're there to drive revenue, and ultimately these facts and figures that you've reported on throughout the last couple of weeks, that's the blood flow that keeps things alive. And so it's somewhat unsurprising, even though a lot of these big headlines about, Meta, they've made some pivots in their fact checking. For example, there's been a lot of talking about that. The layoffs, there's been a lot of talking about that, but there's nothing personal about those decisions, or at least there shouldn't be. They're business decisions to help run a business.
Yeah, it's just the way the world works.
Love it or hate it, it's the way it goes. What about outside of these big tech players? What about the world of streaming? What's happening there?
So the world of streaming is very interesting. I mean, one that we covered in depth was Netflix. So Netflix's Q4 results, and they were doing very well at the end of last year. They're really focusing on their ad side of the business and their ad-supported tier, and they're continuing to invest in it and grow it, and people are taking a liking to it. While when you compare it to Disney had more of a decline at the end of last year, and that's because they raised some of their cost of subscriptions. I mean, I had it where I had to consider cancelling my own Disney account because they increased the price for it. I'm like, I don't really want to be paying over £10 a month. But consumers are becoming more price conscious, and they're going to look at options that are cheaper for them. So if it's between not paying anything but watching an ad versus subscribing to a platform that is going to cost them a monthly fee of £10 or more, they're going to choose the free option. They're going to sit through the ads.
That is true. And I've got a personal anecdote on this. In our house, I've got a couple of housemates, and we'd been logged into a Netflix account that was a sort of family account for one of my housemates, and the password crackdown finally got us, and we were kicked out of our Netflix on our TV because it wasn't part of the household, and we'd sort of been sitting there going without Netflix. We didn't get a new account. We just went, all right, we can't log in. We've lost access to Netflix. We're just going to forego the platform. And it had probably been like this for a good couple of months, but I came home literally last night and my housemate had caved and got a Netflix account through its ad tier. So one of the, I believe it's roughly £5 a month. It's one of the cheaper ones. It's the ad-supported Netflix tier, but we have Netflix back in the household again, and they wore us down, and we've joined the ad tier. So maybe that's a parallel for all consumers out there.
You'll go for the cheaper
Well, there was lots of
option
controversy
always.
about the password crackdown, wasn't there? But then it seems from these latest figures that a big growth driver is its restructuring and its ad-supported tiers.
Yeah, thankfully I still haven't been caught with that, and I'm still using my mom's account. So let's hope it doesn't catch me.
I'm saying it'll get you eventually.
But I mean, I think that's something that those platforms need to be cautious about. They need to think about. It's not just businesses that are cutting back on costs. Consumers on a day-to-day are cutting back on costs too, because things are just becoming more and more expensive.
In the UK today, we had inflation go up to 3%. Interest rates are being cut. People are talking about stagflation. The cost of living crisis is going nowhere at the moment.
Yeah, exactly. So it's only gonna be natural that people are gonna look at what fits their budget. And the more that you increase your prices, and you're not actually giving people anything that's that different, the more people are gonna choose the options that fit for them.
Now, it wasn't all ad tiers driving growth, though, was it? And you've said there Disney, suffered a little bit because they increased prices, whereas Netflix did their little bit of a restructure. But what else in the streaming world was delivering returns?
I think it all comes down to content. Content is king, and we've seen it with Netflix with their Q4 and their Q3 results. They did a lot of partnerships that allowed them to have live sports as an exclusive to their platform. And obviously live sports has been a big thing for the past couple of years. Like, they're sitting and they're watching it on streaming more than they are watching it on TV. Investing into that type of content and having it be exclusive to your platform, that's going to drive people. And it's the same with Disney. I mean, Disney, they have big major boost from Moana 2. That's something that's never going to change. You know, AI coming in, people cutting their budgets, whatever. Content is not going to change. Content will remain important.
The live sports element is interesting because you've got these streamers that are now providing not just their library of shows and movies that people can watch on demand, but they've also got those live offerings. And it's not just Netflix, but YouTube TV had a surge in subscribers from Q3 2023 to Q4 2024 after it acquired NFL Sunday matches for the 2023-24 season. And last night alone, I was watching the Champions League on Amazon Prime, who have got that on their streaming service. So certainly sports has become a big driver of live content through these platforms. And I think your point hits home. Content is king across the board. And I dove into this week and reported on the state of streaming a little bit. And it was interesting in terms of global streaming services, the fastest growing Apple TV Plus and Paramount Plus.
It's interesting. I mean, Apple TV, I think something that they did a while back is they kind of had like a free trial for people for the weekend to just drive people to the platform. And I think that's actually really worked for them, because I think it's driven people to actually get a full subscription after getting a little taste of it.
It was kind of slept on, Apple TV Plus. If you look at its library of exclusives, there's some very high grossing shows, some very, very popular ones, the likes of Severance and Slow Horses. And Paramount Plus, I think, is mirroring that strategy of let's make our exclusive content really, really powerful. It's almost the alternative, because neither of these have live sports, where that's sort of what's going to drive new subscribers. You've got the ad tiers, different subscriptions, but then it's also like big sports fans, NFL, Champions League, they're going to jump on just so that they can watch it. So let's bring that over here. If you can't bring that over here, let's get a bunch of originals that people love, that win Emmys, that have done really well. Easier said than done, but Apple and Paramount have managed to pull it off, and that's attracting new subscribers.
I mean, if the content is good, then exclusivity will work for you, because people will then subscribe to that platform just to see that show that everyone's talking about. I mean, Severance to me is one of them.
That's the culture today, isn't it? For a consumer, there's a big fear of missing out, especially if something gets into the sort of social stratosphere that everybody's talking about.
Yeah.
You're like, all right, I've got to find my way in. And as you said, a free trial is not a bad little taster. Okay. So we've looked at the results and the lay of the land for tech and streaming. What about that last one we touched on a bit there, social media? Is anything happening on that front before I let you go?
Meta's ad revenue jumped 21%, and YouTube's ad business also showed that it stayed strong for Q4. But then when you compare that to things like linear TV is declining.
If we're doing a channel comparison.
Yeah. So linear TV is declining while social and streaming are both growing. So I think we're going to continue to see social grow for the rest of the year. There might be some hesitancy, I think, with Meta when we spoke about, changing their content moderation and Zuckerberg having a bit more less restrictions on the platform,
favoring free speech.
Exactly.
Yes.
I think people might think that might scare advertisers off a little bit, but I do still think they will be present on those platforms.
Yeah, the argument for scaring off advertisers is it somewhat mirrors what X did and the subsequent loss of advertisers, but Meta, I mean, we spoke about this at length when we coined Instagram the golden child, and people just want to be there. And notably, there was some research that came out this week from me that in terms of discovery, and this is across all generations, the social media tool that is the most popular for discovery is Facebook and YouTube, which was interesting because that's just, I would have said for sure that's got to be TikTok or Instagram. But in terms of product discovery, and this was a report from Bazaar Voice, their shopper experience index, social media platforms for product discovery, Facebook and YouTube are the most popular. So that's something to take away.
Wouldn't have expected Facebook.
No, neither would I. No. But maybe people will move away from Meta. Maybe they won't. Subtly, we reported this week as well that X is actually starting to regain some of its lost advertisers as well. So that's another one to watch. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Snapchat either, who have sort of gone under the radar a little bit in all of this discussion, mostly because they have been free from any controversy in the press. But their 2024 review, full year growth 16% year on year to over 5 billion, primarily driven by direct response advertising. And they had a Q4 revenue of 14% year over year. So Snapchat suddenly doing quite well with its augmented reality, virtual reality investment.
It feels like I'm back in 2015, the reemergence of Facebook and Snapchat.
Yeah, Facebook, Snapchat, direct response ads. It's an interesting world we're living at the moment. Who knows what we're going to be talking about next week, Reem. But as always, it's been a pleasure having you in the studio to give us this breakdown of people's Q4 earnings reports.
Thank you for having me.
This episode of the Performance Marketing Unlocked podcast is sponsored by MediaHawk. Struggling to connect online and offline customer journeys? You're not alone. Many marketers miss out on valuable insights because they can't track what happens before a customer calls, while they're on the phone, and after the conversation ends. MediaHawk's call tracking and marketing attribution platform connects every customer interaction across calls, clicks, and conversions, giving you a complete view of what's driving leads and sales. With deeper insight into online and offline touchpoints, you can optimize spend and maximize ROI. Brands using MediaHawk have saved 22% on Google ad spend and increased inbound inquiries by 75%. See what MediaHawk can do for you at mediahawk.co.uk/PMW. Helena.
Hello.
Hello and welcome to the Performance Marketing Unlocked studio. How are you doing on this sunny Monday afternoon?
I am good. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You've made the journey here from Brighton.
That's correct, yeah.
We appreciate you coming down. How are things on the south coast at the minute?
Sunny, nice. I was out on the seafront doing my boot camp this morning. So, yeah, very lucky to live by the sea. Actually, it's great.
Oh, lucky you. My partner just paid a visit down to Brighton over the weekend as well, actually. She's a big fan of the lanes and all of the shops down there. So got to do some exploring, and in a couple of months' time, it'll be warm enough for me to get down there.
Yes,
have a look down.
It's lovely, and actually, we get quite a few surfers down there. If the sea is right, you do get surfers down there.
Amazing.
And kite surfing is quite popular down there.
Well, I have been down to Brighton before, and it is windy, that's for sure.
It is. It's a great place.
Now, Helena, you are an entrepreneur. You're the founder of the Real Eating Company.
Yes.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself? Give us the quick elevator pitch. Who are you? What's your background? What got you into the world of business?
Yes. So my background before I went into hospitality was actually advertising. And I had got into sort of the advertising world, probably it was in my early 20s actually. And I worked for an agency that has now long since disappeared called Arc Advertising. It was my first proper job. And their main account was News International at the time. So The Sun, News of the World, The Times, a lot of TV advertising. And through my career, I then went through to Ogilvy and Mather, Publicis, was more involved in the media side, media research, media buying. But it was really at Ogilvy and Mather where I got my sort of first taster of what it was like to actually understand a brand and how that then translated into the different media channels that you might use. And at that time, looking at targeting demographics, it was still quite a new thing. And that was really when it was kind of instilled in us that every brand had to have a brand print or a brand audit, which was the sort of holy grail, if you like, of what that brand stood for. And you couldn't really deviate from it. And yeah, that's really where I sort of got to understand the importance of branding and positioning and how your customers felt about your brand and how they might expect to see you. So sort of fast forward, I was living in London. I had 2 young children and I had always been interested, as a lot of people are nowadays, but if you sort of think back sort of 20, 25 years ago, food, cooking, sourcing great ingredients was not such a big thing as it is now. And with my work, I used to travel around quite a bit. And I was, in London, it was fine. But outside of London, it was very difficult to get a good coffee or,
the age-old problem.
Good coffee. I mean, it's still a little bit like that, but nowhere near as bad as it was back in the day. Nice food and so on. So I had 2 young kids. I was married, we lived in London, and we took a little bit of time out, my husband and I, and we went to Australia actually. And I was really inspired by what they do there naturally. They sort of all day dining, brunch, coffee, it was all part and parcel of the same thing, all very accessible. It wasn't a special occasion. And I had got to the point where I was sort of in my mid-30s. At that point, we were just about to move out to Brighton because we'd had enough of London life. And I'd also realised at that point that it was going to be quite difficult to continue my advertising career at the level that I had got to without really a full-time commitment, sort of 5 days a week. If you think back, working from home was obviously not a thing at all. When I had my second child, they didn't even have a proper maternity policy at Ogilvy and Mather. So you think about this is really kind of back in the dark ages.
This is around the early 2000s, am I right?
If not a few years before that, actually.
Late 90s.
I do come from quite an entrepreneurial family. My father was a sort of real entrepreneur, always had lots of businesses on the go. And as the eldest, I sort of always felt that expectation that I would do my own thing at some point. And I just felt that when we got to Brighton, that was my time when I realised I wasn't going to be able to work at a senior level 2 or 3 days a week. I certainly didn't want to commute every single day. That defeated the object of moving out. So I decided that I would set up the Real Eating Company. And at that time in Brighton, there were sort of the usual nice restaurants, coffee shops, but they were all very, very central. A lot of people were moving down to Brighton and Hove at that time from London. And there was nothing really in the kind of residential suburbs, I guess, that would cater for families like us. So I thought it would be, it was the right time in my life to do it. So I took that plunge and I did it.
Amazing. Now, the Real Eating Company, it's a sort of a series of independent cafes, brunch style eateries around southern England. You've got a few locations now, all built up. London, obviously Brighton, as far as I think Bournemouth.
No, we're not in Brighton. Right? No, we're in Sussex. So we've got some in Chichester, Horsham. We're out in Kent as well, in Canterbury and Maidstone. We're up in Cambridge. We've got a couple in Cambridge, and we're in London as well.
There we go.
So a bit of a spread out geography.
Through
it wasn't really the plan, but that was more sort of opportunistic.
That's how things unfold with where the market gaps were identified. I should say,
for various reasons, actually. I
really like the story there of you went out to Australia and got that inspiration. As someone from Melbourne, I like to say it's very much the capital of coffee.
Exactly,
and good
is.
Coffee, and
one of the capitals, probably one of the capitals.
Hasn't always been easy finding a consistently good coffee in London, but you can do it. There are very, very good ones around.
There's a lot of choice.
Absolutely, but I hear that's slightly newer, but yes, down in Melbourne we can get quite snitty about our coffee, that's for sure.
Well, absolutely. Melbourne's got a sort of, a great reputation for being one of the centres of coffee in the world.
But you've brought that to southern England now with the Real Eating Company. Now, talk to me about the business since its inception in the mid-2000s, around 2004, if I'm right.
That's
Obviously,
right.
You've now got several locations, as we alluded to there. You've lived through many changes in those 2 decades, including a global pandemic, obviously.
Yes.
Now, what's it been like as an entrepreneur? And a recession.
And now a cost of living recession.
Exactly.
So quite a lot.
Talk to me about that journey as an entrepreneur in different,
there's
but always difficult
there's a lot to cover. It's
macro
always,
and microeconomic climates.
Yeah, always. There's lots of things to kind of to grapple with. People say to me, if you look back and you knew what was coming down the track, would you have ever started this journey? And I mean, of course, life doesn't work like that. And the sort of knee-jerk reaction would be, well, God, there's been really difficult times. But actually, no, I don't think I would have done anything differently. You learn a huge amount along the way. And so when I started, I took this beautiful listed building in Hove. It was an art gallery, and converted it into my food emporium that I had seen in Australia and Sydney particularly as a thing. It was very, very much the thing that you had there. So we had a sort of coffee shop, we had a restaurant, we had a deli, we did online hampers, we did, and I had all these floors doing all these different things. And it was great. But we were sometimes we were busy fools. Like I was a bit, we took a lot of money, but we spent a lot of money. Even though I did have advice from fellow hospitality operators at that time, there's nothing like actually, being in the saddle yourself and realizing that, and from a sort of branding perspective, I was very clear at that stage, what we stood for. I spent a disproportionate amount of time, getting the logo right and working with design agencies and the PR and the colours of the menu and all these kind of things. What was more surprising to me then, which shows maybe how naive I was the amount of work that it took to get people, particularly in hospitality, to work together. The consistency piece is really hard, to make sure that things are exactly as you want them every single day without you physically having to be there to see that every plate that goes out, is it plated correctly? Is every coffee properly made? Is every cheese that we were selling wrapped in the correct way? that was a really challenging piece of hospitality. And that makes or breaks you, essentially, because you can have the most beautiful looking logo and a great PR piece or whatever it is, or a beautiful website. Spent a lot of money, £10,000 on a website 20 years ago, you know, it's a lot. I mean, there was an online shop as well, but a lot of my focus, not surprisingly, because of my background, was into that. And I just seemed to be sort of constantly, it felt to me, blown off course a bit by the day-to-day problems with chefs and waiting staff. And, you know, I do remember in like the first few months, 2 chefs in the kitchen, both grown men, and they didn't like each other very much. And one of them had a knife and they started fighting, and they were both much taller than me, over 6 foot. And I remember sort of there trying to pull them apart as one was just trying to kind of stab the other one, and that was not a situation I expected to find myself.
No, I imagine it wasn't.
So it was a real learning curve, shall we say.
I was going to ask, how did the background in advertising sort of inform that? Because there's a very particular brand with the Real Leading Company, and it's very consistent. And obviously, there's a big emphasis on localities and the high street and bringing those people together. Perhaps from what I'm hearing is it sounds like there was a bit of an over-investment into all these things initially, and then, all the people, the hiring, this will just take care of itself. We'll get those cogs in for the machine and it'll all run smoothly.
That's exactly
But when someone's going at someone else with a knife, obviously something's going to go.
And exactly.
Lessons learned.
Exactly. And it just was, you know, how the control, because good chefs are mostly creative souls. Okay, they want to create a great plate of food, and they don't think about the cost of what's going on that plate as much as they should. It's quite unusual to find very commercially orientated chefs, and so the cost control element was, you know, you go, oh, that's amazing, and you know, customers were thrilled. It was like, great food, this is fantastic. But we just weren't making enough money out of it. So that is that whole piece. And, you know, the same comes into play with service, for example. You know, you can put a lot of people on the floor looking after customers, but actually, does the business warrant that? And have you got the right people? It's not just about bodies on the floor, it's just about what kind of service are they giving.
It's working to strike that balance.
And there's a lot of spinning plates. But yes, if I look back, the money and the time that I spent in the design, you know, like I said, whether it's logo, website, or in fact the interiors, you know, and how they looked, I should have focused more of my time on the actual operations of the business.
What about as the business has expanded to multiple locations now? Has that been challenging, maintaining consistency across each one? Because if that initial challenge is obviously very much the day-to-day side, when it comes to the expansion, the things that are a bit easier to be consistent are like the branding, the menus, what's there, what's not. How have you managed to bring in new locations with new people, new chefs, and get all that right?
It's quite hard, but I think the hardest jump was when we went from 1 to 2, because I sort of, all these problems that I've mentioned, I sort of eventually grappled with them and managed them. But it really was based on me being there a lot. And I thought, well, now I can do this. We can open another one. I had a good team, and they were consistent and reliable and doing things as I wanted them to be done. So I thought, I can open a second one now. Opened a second one in Lewes, not very far from Brighton. And it started all over again, because it was like having a sort of a needy child in a way that was saying, you know, Mom, what about us? You know, every time you thought that there wouldn't be problems, there were problems. And that was difficult, transitioning, because obviously I couldn't be in 2 places at once. So managing that transition. And that was the first time that I brought in an operations person. So someone else who could share that load and put some sort of structure into the back end of the business. And as you then scale, you've got to have structure and process in place. As it stands now, yes, I have a team sounds very grand. We're not a huge business, but I have got people in the business who do specific things, what I call the back end of the business, to make sure it runs properly. And also now, which we didn't have back in the day, there are a lot of online systems and AI-driven programs that take a lot of that, what we had to do as people, into the business without a huge amount of cost. So whether that's things like allergens or specs, or, so that we know if we're making a certain dish, it's going to be made the same way with the right ingredients, not different ingredients, not something else that the chef has decided to do on that day. Those elements of control are now in place through sort of software, basically. Same with staffing and rotas and clocking in and clocking out. All these kind of things are more controllable.
Lent on the technology to help you scale.
The
and
technology
in many ways,
has definitely helped.
You become a master delegator as well.
Absolutely. But I think that whole sort of AI technology piece for hospitality and in QSR, which, is sort of quality service sort of restaurants, is that sort of middle ground, is an interesting one, because some of our competitors have gone to touchscreen ordering, or scanning a barcode and getting your QSR code and getting your menus and paying your bills. And that's an interesting one, because it has not really got a great deal of traction outside of London. And I think that for me at the moment, there's obviously a huge interest in how technology can take out more of the people cost in hospitality because of all these tax increases we've got coming. But I think it's a tricky one, because in hospitality, the whole point is to look after your guests and make them feel good when they come in. And technology, I think, is very limited in how it can actually create an ambience and a connection with people.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to today's show. I wanted to give you a timely reminder that Performance Marketing Unlocked 2025 is on the horizon. It isn't just an event, it's an experience. Think immersive activations, endless networking opportunities, and 1,500 marketers in attendance. With 7 stages of content, we've got something for everyone, from AI shaping the future of performance marketing to e-commerce strategies for tackling walled gardens and more. Speakers include industry heavyweights like Les Binet, Jordan Schwarzenberger of Sidemen fame, and many, many others, including myself, and a live podcast for you to tune into. There will be something for everyone across both day 1 and day 2 of the event. Importantly, tickets are still available, which you can secure at performancemarketingworld.com, coming up on the 4th and 5th of March. So jump on over to the website and grab your tickets. I'll see you there. Yeah, I want to touch on, obviously, building the consumer base a little later, because you've alluded to something there that's the hotbed of discussion at the moment. It's the news hook, as it were, and that is the current climate in the UK for small businesses. Particularly, we've got the employer national insurance contribution increases on the horizon, business rate discount decrease, minimum wage increases. If we zoom out, you as a founder of a business that's thrived for 2 decades in the UK, now, which is quite a long stint, really.
Yes, and independently, I should say.
Exactly. So today's current climate, the challenges of today, how are these things that you're planning to handle? What are the strategies that you've got to take in? Because it's not an easy environment for small businesses at all. No,
it's really challenging. So coming in April, just to sort of set out exactly what we're dealing with, we have minimum wage increases coming in April, which is fine. They happen every year. And obviously we want people to be paid more. There is a cost of living crisis still. People are feeling they don't have enough money. So that's all well and good. However, it's worth noting that the increases have been way above inflation for the last few years.
Which is already quite high.
The 2 biggest changes alongside this, which we've never had to contend with before, is the increase in national insurance. which is going up to 15%. But the big kicker with this is they are taking the threshold down to £5,000 from £9,000. So there's a lot of part-time people who work paid on an hourly basis, might be students, single mums. It suits them to work that way. Weren't paying national insurance, wouldn't have national insurance on their wages. They now will. So from our perspective, it makes them significantly more expensive to employ. So the national insurance piece is big. The second big tax increase for us is around business rates, because since the pandemic, it was relief offered to hospitality and retail businesses. So your business rates were discounted at 25% of what they would normally have been. And that has now been changed for the first time since the pandemic. So we were getting 75% relief on business rates. That has been changed. We're now getting 40% relief. You might go, well, pandemic's over, get on with it. That's how it is. But it is a significant sum of money. So when you put all those things together, for us as a small business, we have 8 locations. We have, I think, 82 staff on the last payroll. We are going to have to find in one tax year an extra £120,000 just to stand still. And that's a significant sum of money. I've looked at the numbers in detail.
What's the plan?
There's a combination.
There's
a combination of things. I don't have the silver bullet. Pricing, everyone is talking about it. Even the big retailers are talking about it. Supermarkets are talking about this. We don't have much option but to put prices up. But obviously we have to sort of sense check that and make sure that we're not putting prices up, A, more than people are prepared to pay, and B, we look at our competitors very closely. So we're not going to make our coffee, for example, more expensive than Cafe Nero or Costa Coffee. But if you look at their prices now, they are probably £1, I think, more for a cup of coffee than it was even 2 or 3 years ago. It's significant. So price increases, unfortunately, will be a part of the answer. But that drives inflation as well, which is apparently the government's ambition to sort of keep inflation down and to make things more affordable. I think, what is the expression? Put money in people's pockets. Actually, it's not going to do that. But, so prices will go up. What we will also look at is, and we've sort of started this, is reducing the range of options that we have, because obviously the broader your range, whether you have a menu or you're a Gales, for example, or a Starbucks, you will have a range of food and a range of drinks. And of that range, you will probably have 50 or 60% of it will be your core, that people will buy over and over again. It's the most popular stuff that you do. And then the other things are the nice to have, the stuff, the eye candy that people like to see. They don't necessarily buy it, but they like to see it. Those things will start to be reviewed.
So because it's chewing the fat, if you will.
Yeah,
I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. You've got to look at, and where we can make savings with technology, for example, is definitely one that we're already doing. There's lots of sort of drivers like that. Maybe looking at, we've done it to sort of trading hours, because, if people are spending less money, before it was you open 7 days a week, nearly sort of 10 hours a day. That was the norm. And I think in London, we're still used to that. But outside of London, there's been a creep. You can see it where shops are closing earlier. So lots of these little kind of incremental pieces that we're going to have to look at. There's no one big thing. It's lots of little things.
Before we move on and round out with the Resell Me a Pen challenge, I wanted to give an opportunity, because obviously the difficulty there is small businesses come under a lot of pressure, but so do consumers as well at this point in time. The cost of living crisis, people, we want money in people's pockets. It's not happening so much. Consumer confidence has remained sort of stubbornly low. how do you lean on your brand and your relationship with your customers in trying times like this? How are you ensuring that you still get those people in the door every day and still build out that base as best you can, building that relationship with consumers?
Well, there are, even though I've just painted quite a negative picture of taxes and all the sort of things we're going to have to look at, and you're, oh my days, this is not great. We have got, I think, quite a couple of really good, strong advantages that the bigger companies don't have. And that's what I've kind of, and I'll say what those are in a minute, but it's those things that you've really kind of got to lean into when times are tough like this and really understand what difference you have and what difference you can make. And you got to punch above your weight, basically, but you can do it if you understand your kind of strengths and your brand DNA, I guess, and why your customers come to you in the first place. So we're passionately independent, and people will say, well, what does that mean? But it means because I don't have, and the business doesn't have, banks or shareholders or private equity behind it, every pound that we spend and every shop that we open and every sandwich we prepare or every drink that we bring onto our menu, we have thought about, and it makes a difference to our business. And that's why I sort of call, we're passionately independent, and customers feel that when they come in. They want to support the smaller businesses on their high street. Whenever I talk on socials about the fact that we are an independent business and how we're working hard to keep prices at a decent sort of price point for customers, and how we go about doing this, it always gets a lot of traction. People engage with it. They like it.
There's that transparency, I suppose.
It's the authenticity, I think, is what it is. And how we speak and how I speak about the business, I am the same always, whether I'm talking to you, talking to a customer, talking to a member of staff, that's what you get. Is I will, obviously I care hugely about the business and everything that goes on in it. And I think that that's something that customers, they want to support the smaller guy. They want to feel that their money is...
They're savvy as well, customers. Yeah. They can see through things that are inauthentic. And I think the big thing you're alluding to there is ultimately it comes down to trust.
Yes.
And they believe in you.
Yes.
And so looking ahead to the future, Helena, is that the strategy? It's relying on that trust and remaining authentic and leaning into what's made you. What's got you, and what advice do we have before we move on for our marketers, business owners, anyone listening who are a little bit dim on the future?
Okay.
Give them some hope.
Okay. The other reason that small businesses have got, I think, a great strength, untapped strength, is that when, and I saw this in the sort of last recession, is that, and we saw it ourselves also through the lockdown, is that when things are volatile, economically, politically, globally, so much is going on, that there's an element of creative destruction. And my experience has been that bigger companies, in our space, but I think the same applies in most sectors, they struggle just because of the sheer size to adapt quickly enough, and they become distant from their customers. It's like a sort of touch point. They lose that connection just by dint of being big, I think. And smaller businesses, as long as you keep your sort of drive and entrepreneurial zest and your opportunistic head on,
you can be a bit more fluid.
You can be much more fluid. It's that sort of bendy oak. I think it's the Japanese thing. Is you've got to stay bendy. You really, really do. You've got to lean into it. I think as humans, we quite like comfort. We like status quo. We like to know what's going to go on from one day to the next. You kind of have to shake yourself up a bit, because there will be opportunities out there for things, to grow your business, to do new things. You just kind of have to keep your mind attuned to it because it is a bit stressful. But, as a real example of that, in lockdown, we acquired 3 shops in lockdown. One was in Cambridge from Pret. They had 3 shops. They wanted to go down to 2. One was on the Strand, was a Starbucks they'd left. Another one was a Patisserie Valerie in Marble Arch. The point is that we would never have been offered those shops before the pandemic because we're like a small business. The landlords were like not interested, because our covenant strength isn't strong enough. But they were just desperate to get a tenant in. And I could have taken the view that it's a bit too scary, we might stretch ourselves too much, it's better to stick to the market that we know. But I saw it as an opportunity to try something different. And I'm glad we did, because we grew significantly through that period.
In times of trouble, there's always those opportunities that do arise.
Yes.
And obviously, it's going to take some calculated risk, but
when you're a small business owner, you've got to grab it and just try and stay true to your roots and be authentic through it. And I think that's a good combination.
Well, Helena, you've certainly sold me on your chops as an entrepreneur, but now it is time for PMW's famous Resell Me a Pen challenge to refresh the listeners of how it works. You've got 60 seconds to resell me an outdated product or service. I've got my little timer clock in front of me now. I'll give you a warning when there's 30 seconds left and when there's 10 seconds left.
Okay.
But do you want to reveal to myself and the listeners, Helena, what it is you're going to attempt to resell?
I'm going to attempt to resell a dictionary, a paper dictionary.
Amazing. A paper dictionary, Helena.
Not on Google.
A paper
and not
dictionary.
on AI. A proper big fat dictionary.
The physical
English,
book. Old
fat,
school.
Old school dictionary.
Everyone knows what it is. Brilliant.
Yes.
Helena, 60 seconds on the clock. Your time starts now.
Okay, I'm going to resell you the idea of a dictionary, which has now been overtaken pretty much, I think, by a screen. So a dictionary, I think, is really important in today's world because communication is more critical than ever before. And words are where communication comes from. And I just remember the wonder when I was learning at school of opening a dictionary and just being staggered at the amount of words that existed just on 2 pages, where the words had come from, how you pronounce them, other connected words. And I think in today's world, to extend people's vocabulary and ability to communicate, I think there's nothing like it.
Amazing. 55 seconds on the clock. We've got some time to spare. It is really difficult, but I appreciate the pitch there, and it rings true. I like looking at an older thing like a dictionary and then selling it to the younger audience, and why the people, particularly children these days, who are so connected digitally.
What does that word mean? But
they're growing up in a world of technology and digital, and everything's spoon-fed to them a little way when it comes to access of information.
Yeah.
And the dictionary, you're right, there's that importance of figuring out for yourself, going through quite a volume
and it's
of
the
work.
Context and the weight and the sheer breadth of words that are available.
It just gives you a physical representation, representation of all the words that are out there. And it's an important skill that I imagine young children might be lacking these days. So I think that was a great pitch, Helen.
Thank you.
Amazing.
You buy one then.
I think I would. And
good.
Maybe, pending what happens with the future of the real eating company, maybe you can go and resell dictionaries for everyone if break glass in case of emergency.
I could do.
Helena, it's been a pleasure having you on today's show. Can't thank you enough for joining us.
Thank you very much.
And that concludes this episode of the Performance Marketing Unlocked podcast. A big thank you to Reem Makari for joining me at the beginning of the episode to chat all things Q4 revenue reports. And of course, a big thank you to Helena Hudson, the founder of The Real Eating Company, for giving us an insight to an entrepreneur and business leader's life in this difficult, turbulent small business climate. Someone who succeeded for 20 years and hopefully will continue to succeed in the world of UK business. And of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't thank you, the loyal listener, for tuning in each and every fortnight as you do. We will be back in a fortnight's time with another episode of the Performance Marketing Unlocked podcast. If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe to the show on your podcast platform of choice. And we're also on YouTube, LinkedIn, and TikTok at Performance Marketing World or Performance Marketing Unlocked. So make sure you go on over to those socials and show us some love. Thanks again. In the meantime, have an amazing week, and you'll be hearing from me shortly. Bye for now.